Matthew Davies, production designer for 5 Days at Memorial. This is about the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, specifically at Memorial Hospital. So I imagine the book was a hugely valuable resource, but where do you even begin with a project of this magnitude?
It was actually a huge undertaking. Just the amount of information that is in the book, but also, I guess most, stories have a single storyteller. In our case, it really felt, though John Ridley and Carlton Cuse had written these phenomenal scripts, it felt like it was Sherry Fink's story as our producer and the writer of the novel. And she actually provided all of her assets that went into the novel. And I think there was something like 3,200 individual assets. So that included everything from layouts of the hospital to photographs. A lot of them were date stamped. So we set about carefully reconstructing the order of events at Memorial, the escape routes that people took. We really had to go down the rabbit hole to understand really, what actually happened in the hospital in almost forensic detail before we could begin designing the show. So it was probably the biggest undertaking of that kind that I've ever done. And my department, first time I really worked with archivists and researchers on that level. We had just so much information to go through before we could begin designing it.
Mm-hmm. So obviously the main set is the hospital set. So how diligently did you recreate the whole structure? It looked like a real hospital. Like I know it still exists there, but it's a different hospital now, obviously. So what went into design of the hospital?
The hospital exterior is pretty much identical to the real hospital. Anyone that works at Oxford Baptist, as it is now called, would recognize their place of work. We did 3 weeks of lightering in New Orleans and collecting drone footage. And, it was just, like I said, it was a massive undertaking to really unpick all of the events at Memorial Hospital, the exact geography of the interior, and then to recreate that in studio. And we, different producers had this property at different points in time. I believe that Scott Rudin and Brian Murphy were producers at one point, and everyone faced the same issues, which is how do you make this story? Because it's so big and complex. It happens at a micro and macro scale. You're looking at what's going on in the city and the collapsing levees. You're inside the hospital, dealing with these very kind of intimate human kind of portraits. And so we ended up spending quite a bit of time in prep, just with Sherry and the producers and writers and directors, just trying to work out every detail of the story and trying to make those 5 days as realistic and as truthful as we could be. And in the end, we built I think a 27,000 square foot outdoor tank, and we built a 30,000 square foot interior hospital environment that all had to be rigged for hurricane conditions. So we had, fans and drip trays and drip rigs and all these things going at the same time. And then we had to track the deterioration of the hospital over the 5 days as well. So we had 5 levels of breakdown that we had to achieve as well. So,
So how many parts of it did you construct? Did you just do it like floor by floor, including the helipad?
Yeah, so different people took different routes for escape from the hospital. Some people were airlifted from the helipad. It was a torturous route getting to the helipad. They had to go down from, there was a ICU on the 8th floor. There was life care on the 7th floor. There were all the other various administrative parts of the hospital. They had to go down to the 2nd floor, squeeze through a narrow hole into the parking garage, and then load into pickup trucks. They were taken up the ramps to the bottom of the helipad, and then they had to climb a 40-foot staircase to get up to the top of the helipad. So we actually built all of the elements, 15,000 square foot helipad, the stairs in their entirety, like everything had to be built in pieces and then composited back together.
So the staircase was actually connected to the helipad?
No, it was built
No.
right next to it.
Right next
So we built the helipad in the field. It was built 6 feet tall. We had telehandlers with digi-blue screen kind of wrapping 3 sides of it. The fourth wall was a wall of the physical wall of the hospital that we built that connected to the helipad. And then right next to it, we pile drove footings for a 40-foot practical staircase so that actors could actually climb the full extent of it. And that was for a very particular camera move that John Ridley wanted to do, that pulled out from under the staircase and came right up to the top to meet with the helipad. So yeah, there was a lot of Viva's work involved.
That's insane. Well, on the ground level, it's the ambulance ramp, and for most of the show, it's flooded, and we see like boats. And I'm assuming that's the part where you build in a tank, a water tank.
Yes, so we built a 27,000 square foot outdoor tank that could be filled up to 4'6" in depth, and all that water had to be filtered and heated and dyed, and just sort of managing that and the various water levels with the raising and lowering of the water levels all had to be worked out in advance. So I sat down with Libby Miller, our first AD, for about 2 weeks, and we unpicked the entire shooting schedule to work out what we could deliver and when.
Wow. Well, like you said, like the looks of the sets are not static, because you have to show how it deteriorates over 5 days. So I guess, how do you build things that are supposed to fall apart eventually? Like, I mean, even in the first episode, like the walkway is about to collapse when they're trying to run through it, when the storm is hitting. So yeah, how do you go about doing that?
So the walkway was actually built as part of a huge composite environment that included exteriors and interiors all in studio. The actual walkway itself was set onto airbags and gimbals, and it could be basically manipulated to create the rock and tilt motions of the walkway under hurricane conditions. At the same time as we had our real actors running across it with smashing glass, which all had to be controlled, debris flying through camera. Everything we did, we tried to do as practically and to make it as real as possible, so that the actors' reactions would be real and in the moment. John Ridley is very much about method, and he wanted all of the geographic routes that people took during the evacuation to actually kind of mirror the actual routes. It was very much it was a big exercise in unpicking this disaster to a level where we knew where everybody was in the hospital at any point in time, and then reconstructed their journeys as faithfully as we could. The interior is a little bit different to the actual hospital, but the tone and flavor of it is very much identical. The color schemes, the deterioration, as you said, we had 5 levels of deterioration that we had to track through the 5 days immediately post-storm. We had the storm itself to deal with, and then there was the aftermath where the levees broke and the city filled like a big bowl of water. And then it became about the escape of the 2,000 people that were trapped in the hospital over the 5 days following the storm.
Mm-hmm. How did you guys recreate the levees breaking and the flooding? How much of that was CGI?
It's interesting. A lot of the footage that people see in the show and they think, oh, this is found footage. It wasn't actually
the news footage.
There wasn't as much footage as we thought there was. I remember seeing a lot more at the time than actually we could sort of source. I guess the world was kind of slow to realize what was really happening in New Orleans. People were trapped outside of the extent of the floodwaters. There was helicopter footage from the time that we did, base a lot of those shots on, but the resolution of televisions back then was nothing like the HD today. It wasn't 16:9, it was like 133 aspect. It was completely different. And we realized very early on that what we assumed would be a wealth of footage just really wasn't there. So we had to then set about recreating all of that from assets. So we actually built a lot of those physical assets in our tank once we'd finished shooting the hospital exterior scenes, so we'd get interaction with actors and water and reflections in the water and everything else. And then we took all of those elements and then composited back together. So it was a real marriage of physical elements for compositing work.
You created your own footage, your own news footage.
We basically did, yeah, we had to do that.
Yeah. Well, lastly, have you gotten any feedback from the people who were at Memorial back then about the show?
Not from the individuals themselves who work there. Obviously, it's legally it's a very delicate thing to make to recreate a disaster of this nature, where it involves a lot of living people that were very much implicated in various aspects of the aftermath of this. But what was very rewarding was actually listening to the actors. And Julianne Emery she played Diane Robichaux, and she gave a really beautiful and eloquent account of how a lot of her motivation as an actor. And I think Cherry Jones and Vera Farmiga said the same thing, that the sets actually, being in that environment, it was much easier to kind of connect to or to empathize with the characters and what they were going through, because what we created was so realistic and so true to what those original people had been through. And so that was a big part of their motivation and their performances, and that was very rewarding for the art department to hear that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking with you, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.